Dobar dan. I'm going to have to do this in English because unfortunately I never worked here, so my whole Serbian vocabulary is limited to going to school and playing with my sister who is here in the second row. So thank you for having me, and thank you to the ICT Hub. I'm going to share my experiences trying to implement what Elliot was talking about this morning inside large organizations. So I have some battle scars to share with you this morning. So why are we here? Everything Elliot was talking this morning, we've heard to an extent before, we have tried to do, but unfortunately trying to implement principles of innovation, of fast learning, fast failure inside large organizations is not as easy as it sounds and as appealing as it is in books we read. And how many of you are working in innovation capacity inside your organizations? Quite a few. How many of you find it extremely hard and frustrating every single day? Good, good. So I'm here to tell you you're not alone. What you're experiencing here is not limited to a Serbian environment or Serbian ways of doing business. It's something I have experienced every single day working with some of the largest organizations in the United States and England and all over Europe. Dusan said this morning we are not going to talk about digital transformation, and I can't agree more. But unfortunately, you often hear companies talking about, let's talk about digital transformation. Let's hire consultants to work with us on digital transformation. Digital has happened 20, 30 years ago, and digitization, as you can see, touches 98% of US economy. It's pretty much the same in other countries around the world. It's becoming something that's part of the way we are doing business in Serbia as well. So digital is here to stay. There is this phrase that's talking about software eating the world. That's because we have become digital. Software and technology advancements are becoming a reality that we need to face and accept. This notion of connected worlds, there are people taking pictures of me right now. We are tweeting. No, it's fine, please. But we are tweeting. We are on social media constantly. Even in work environment, we are all connected, right? Why is this important? This little device, I would argue, has changed the way we live completely. There is expectations that we can do everything with our phone, that we can pay bills, that we can check our bank account, that we can order food, that we can log into our flight and download our boarding pass. And so companies like Apple are setting a standard for what customers expect of us. So no matter what industry you work in, no matter what your product is, this is what you're competing with. And this is something I'm really strongly urging you to keep in mind every single day. US ambassador touched a little bit on this and stole my slide. But this is important. General Electric, is one of the rare companies that has survived the last 100 years and stayed on this list. This is a list of Fortune 500 companies in the world. And the average time on that list used to be 60 years. It's down to less than 20 years now. And if you look at the companies that have survived, they're less than 10 on this list in the last 100 years. So that means no one is safe. No matter how big your organization is, no matter how advanced, no matter how much you have, monopoly on the marketplace, you are also under threat. If you look at startups, the situation is no better. Only few, actually 1%, get to that exit. So hundreds and hundreds of startups fail trying to achieve that product market fit, trying to find a product, and in most cases fail because they are struggling to find a business model that works. So we need to take all of those lessons into consideration. This is the most significant, I would say, threat at the moment, and the fact that it's disrupting the workplace completely. 85% of jobs that will exist in only 12 years from now have not been invented yet. Let that sink in and think about what we are doing, how we're educating our kids, what young adults who are just leaving university or in their first jobs are going to have to face. I read in this book recently that our kids are going to have to change their careers 4 or 5 times It means completely, there is no education system can prepare them for it, right? And so as employees, it's really important we start to think about this, right? Can we attract the right talent? Can we recruit the right talent? Can we constantly invest in people, educate them? Because we are going to have to evolve, and people in our organizations are going to have to evolve with us. This is, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest challenge that corporates are facing at the moment, this leadership challenge. I feel, for all the leaders I'm working with, I've never seen people so scared in my life. If you think about CEOs of some of the biggest corporates in America, they had an amazing career, working in a pretty much predictable environment where, all the business skills acquired in business schools around the world were really applicable, where you are navigating space where from year to year you can predict your business results with quite a good accuracy. All of that is gone, based on everything I've said so far. So to adapt as a leader, you need to change your mindset. You need to be leading in a different way. You need to be incentivized in a different way that you have been incentivized so far. And that takes a lot of courage to be different. And I don't think anything that we're going to be discussing today is possible unless we attack this challenge first. And so how are corporates really responding to all the challenges I have mentioned so far? So a good number of executives, 85%, think that innovation is really important. 41% think that their companies are at risk of disruption, but only 6% of them are really satisfied with what their organizations are doing in terms of innovation and how those innovation dollars are actually performing in terms of results. So unfortunately, in spite of those high numbers that are talking about urgency, only 78% of investment is going towards protecting the status quo. Status quo, which means we are investing in protecting our existing products. We are protecting our existing place in a marketplace. We are not investing in order to disrupt competitors or ourselves, because we are still not accepting really that we are being disrupted. This whole digital disruption, startups can eat our way, hasn't really synced in with leadership yet. And so what's happening, even if there is some investment in innovation beyond protection of the core, it looks a little bit like innovation theater. And I think this is a phrase that's now being used over and over and over. What does innovation theater really means? You go and hire someone who's going to lead innovation on a really small scale. You take your executives, your management team to Silicon Valley to see how startups are doing it, hoping it would rub off. You kill the cubicles, so everyone is now sitting in an open space because that's going to help you innovate better. You accelerate something, which means you hire a bunch of people, you set up a lab on the side, you don't give them guidance, you don't give them strategy, and you kind of hope they would stumble into some success. You adopt the jargon, so you talk a lot about innovation and lean startup and fast failure, but you don't really mean it, and nothing in the organizational ecosystem is really set up to support innovation at all. You go casual. I hear companies often talk about their dress policies and the fact that people are in shorts and flip-flops because that's a sign that we are doing something different. And often you see people hire, someone from Google or Apple because, again, if we have someone from Google working with us, then that has to be a silver bullet. So we really need to start moving away from innovation theater, and we need to start thinking about why we're innovating. What is our innovation strategy? Why is innovation strategy important? Without the strategy, your organization looks a little bit like this, right? It's impossible to prioritize what you're working on. It's impossible to set direction or vision for your teams. It's impossible to measure success of your innovation. So you're investing some dollars, dinars, pounds, but it's impossible to measure whether any of that is giving any results beyond, there is few people in the organization that are now behaving differently and acting differently, but beyond that, you're not really seeing any results. And so we need to start with what I call direction of travel. We need to paint a vision for the future of the company. It has to be aligned to your corporate strategy, and you need to take your organization on the journey with you. And the only way to take people on the journey is if you have a vision, if you have a strategy. And strategy that's measurable, not just a vision statement. So how do we define strategy? And this is really important, and this is not something new that's, it's been just invented recently. This is an old definition. You search for strategy on Wikipedia, and this is what comes up. It's a high-level plan to achieve one or more goals under conditions of uncertainty. Uncertainty being a key word. And so to prepare for uncertainty, yes, we can have a plan, but it's not our traditional plan. It's not a 3 to 5 year projections or strategic plan the way we used to do. It's a set of hypotheses, the same way you would define hypotheses when you think about new product or new idea you want to bring to market. You set a direction and you think about strategy as a set of hypotheses we are going to go and try and prove. And so when we talk about innovation, especially companies that are doing it well, they all have strategy that's very, very clear. And in many cases, if you look at this list, and these are some of the companies that have completely disrupted their industry in the last 10 years, most of them didn't do that by having better technology than others. There are a few exceptions here that were really technological advancements. But most of them did it by having a clear strategy and doing what we call business model innovation. So they disrupted the industry by thinking differently about what is the customer need, how are we going to meet that need, how are we going to build value for our customers and ourselves. And you cannot do that unless you have a strategy to start with. Nintendo is a really good example of a company that had inferior technology comparing to their competitor, but they found a marketplace that was completely unaddressed at the time. And so when we talk about innovation strategy, we need to think about it in a context of what I call innovation ecosystem. Starting first with strategy, as I said, as a direction of travel, as a set of hypotheses we need to prove, thinking about what does that mean in terms of our portfolio allocation, how many products do we have in our portfolio, how are they distributed across the 3 horizons, where do we want to play, what markets do we want to try and reach, how do we manage ideas in our portfolio using something like innovation management tools and techniques and principles that are embedded in a life cycle, in innovation accounting, different decision-making structures where teams are really empowered, so governance in the organization needs to change. Then how are teams organized? How do they deliver innovation? What are the innovation delivery practices? And all of that wrapped into the culture, mindset, and people. So when you think about this ecosystem of change, it's a really comprehensive transformation that needs to happen inside large organizations for innovation at scale to happen. This is not an innovation lab on the side. This is not a startup ecosystem of 3 to 5 people in jeans and flip-flops who may get lucky if they know what they're doing and if they do all the principles and practices well and really find that niche marketplace. This is a tremendous transformation effort that needs to happen in so large organizations. So no wonder those leaders are a little bit lost and scared, because to make this change and to build this ecosystem takes years. Innovation doesn't just happen in large organizations. It really requires effort at scale. And so when we talk about some of the key questions we should be asking ourselves every single day, starting with how can we deliver value and find new value for potential customers, not just new existing customers, but new customers, new marketplaces. How can we capture that value for ourselves? So what is the new business model that we can create for our company? How can we extend where we're playing at the moment? What type of innovation we can do inside our organization? Is it business model innovation? Is it technology innovation? Is our innovation strategy aligned to our business strategy? Can we measure it? Can we deliver on our business strategy by innovating more? We are not innovating for innovation's sake. We are innovating because we are struggling at the moment. We are being disrupted by all the organizations around us, or the different competitors. We need to create growth, right? We need to change the way we work inside our organizations because we are not agile or enough. Is our portfolio aligned to our strategy? This is a key question that I'm going to address a little bit more in the next few slides. But really think about it. If we have an innovation strategy, then we need to put our money behind that strategy. We really need to think about it as a systematic effort. How do we manage ideas? So again, we run innovation hackathons. We run hackathons of all sorts, innovation challenges. But we don't have a systematic process or framework for how we evaluate those ideas. It's very hard to assess on an apple-by-apple basis whether innovation idea can really succeed inside the organization or not. How do we measure success? At every single level, from experiment level to idea or product level to portfolio level to transformation level inside the organization. And do we have the culture inside of organization where innovation can flourish or not? Because if we are still doing things in the same old way, then we can change the processes, we can hire new people. Elliot touched on that, but we can't really innovate. And so I mentioned this alignment between innovation strategy, corporate strategy, and portfolio allocation. So when we think about types of innovation, we talk about 3 horizons: core, where we are optimizing our existing products for existing customers. And this is, as I said this morning, 78% of effort usually is, so protecting that core. Adjacent, where we are potentially looking for new products and services for existing customers, so in adjacent space. And then transformational. This is disruptive. This is new products, new marketplace. This is thinking outside of the box. This is going to potentially even industries that we haven't touched before. This is doing things in a different way. When we talk about what Harvard Business Review published as a golden ratio, advice was that we should invest around 70% in core, so to continue the cash cow business, while we continually invest and search for new business models. So 20% in adjacent space, 10% in transformational. That's based on data they've collected from multiple different industries and companies. You can find your own gold ratio. The percentages are not really that important. What's important is this notion that we need to approach innovation in a systematic way, starting with strategy and then really putting money behind that strategy. This is not, we're going to play a little bit on the side and hopefully find something. What's really interesting is that 10% investment in transformational innovation results in 70-80% of new revenue that company can generate. So that's a significant growth, potential growth for the company, versus investing in core and hoping for 2% year-on-year returns, which are really, in this point in time, not going to make much difference. This is an example of company that has recognized this strategy and portfolio approach that I've just described for you. They could have happily said, Google is such a tremendous business for us. We can continue to drive and invest in Google. And they said, Google is our cash cow for now, but we are very aware it's not going to exist forever, and we need to start thinking about where else we need to invest. And so they moved from being a Google to being Alphabet, which is a portfolio company, and these are all the new businesses they're investing, some in adjacent space and some in a very transformative, disruptive space. So they're looking and searching actively for a new Google inside Alphabet. That means they're doing the only thing that we can do now to survive, and that's self-disrupt. So the game is either we find something that's going to disrupt our own business, and that becomes the future of our business, or someone else is going to disrupt us, and then it's game over, like it was for Kodak and Toys R Us and Radio Shack and many, many, many companies. The graveyard is full of stories at the moment. And so if we have that innovation strategy, and if we have an agreement within the leadership team how much we want to invest between core, adjacent, and transformative, then we need to start thinking about how do we map all the ideas that are emerging inside the business to that portfolio, and how do we manage those ideas? How do we prioritize them? How do we get to success with those ideas, to what we call product market fit? And one of the really key principles that we need to start to think more is this concept of ambidextrous organization. Steve Blank, if you're familiar with Steve's work, has been talking a lot about this concept that existing corporates, based on history of operating in a safe space, have optimized everything inside them for execution. Right? So you're executing on a known business model. If you're a publisher like Pearson was, you're publishing books. You have been publishing books for hundreds of years. You know how to do that. You can predict your results. Everything in the organization, from how you run strategy to how you think about your portfolio to how you execute on projects, has been optimized for execution. And then disruption happens, and you're being disrupted, and you need to start looking for new ideas and search for new business models, and you apply the principles of execution to innovation, to searching. And that doesn't work. You kill ideas immediately. And so this notion that Searching for a new business model is very different from executing on existing business model. It's something that big corporates need to learn to do well. And they need to do both things, and that's quite hard. If you're a startup, all you need to do is do search well, right? Once you grow and get to that, point of being a good, big, established company, then you need to learn how to execute at scale as well, which some of the startups really struggle. But if you're a big organization, this is a tremendous challenge because you forgot how to search. You've done it once, but many, many years ago, and since then, everything in your environment has been optimized for execution. And so when we talk about innovation management, this idea of the life cycle is really important. Every idea goes through the life cycle, from idea all the way to the retirement. How we manage those ideas through the funnel is very different. The way you're managing ideas when they're in early stages is very different to how you're managing existing products in the marketplace. That means different setup for your teams. That means you're asking different questions if you're making decisions. That means different investments at different stages. That means different KPIs. If you're searching for a business model, for a new idea, and you don't have a product market fit, it's going to be very hard to produce ROI that someone in finance can be happy with. And we don't want people feeling that they need to make up numbers. So we need to find a way to evaluate those ideas, as I said, on an apple-by-apple basis, using different criteria, using different set of KPIs, to how we evaluate ideas later on when they're already in the marketplace, when they have existing customers, and where measuring ROI is much easier. This also means once you have an idea and it gets some traction, you don't go and hire 100 people because that's premature. That's later on when we are scaling that product in the marketplace. You think about your smallest possible team that's going to build an MVP. What is an MVP? A minimum viable product, emphasis being on viable, not on cool technology in the background, on viable, which means we are proving our customer needs, and we have a validated business model. Those are the two key components. Technology and feasibility, and can we build it, is the third. That's important, but we do that later after we have proven the need and proven the business viability. I'm going to give you a quick example, and I'll talk a bit more about Pearson as a case study. But when we implemented this process at Pearson, developed this framework, and started to evaluate all ideas, two things happen. First, we managed to really shorten the time we would invest and money in proving ideas. We had this partnership that we wanted to test with one of the big schools in England outside, so in Middle East. And in the past, a big team would be formed. There would be consultants working on a business case. We would go and find a space for the school, build a school, spend years going through all the issues of running the school and all of that. And instead, we produced a small video. And we went to Middle East and tested the concept that we described in that video with, school administrators, ministries of education, parents, and it proved that no one heard of that school or of that concept, and no one wanted that in Middle East. And so it was the, very quick failure, very small investment, but it gave us proof that we can do this at scale inside large organizations. To support that innovation framework that I just described, we need to start funding differently. So this whole concept of innovation accounting doesn't only mean different KPIs and different ways of assessing, it means different ways of funding. And as many of you know in this room, finance is a pretty big barrier, usually inside large organizations. They like to see the business case. They want to be convinced that, they should invest something. Funnily enough, they have no problem investing tens of millions, sometimes even hundreds of millions inside large organizations on something that's just written on paper without any proof. But when you start to talk about, can we try this concept of, incremental funding, seed funding? Can we start to operate the way VCs operate? They initially freak out and they're like, oh, no, we don't have 10,000, 20,000 to waste. Everything has been allocated through the strategic planning process. We need to just continue as is. And then you start to talk about, some of the big failures we all experience by not proving our business model early enough and just trusting the business case. And the concept of reducing the risk starts to sink in. So the whole idea is, ideas are free. Anyone in the company can have an idea. Great. Let's prioritize them. And let's give them some money to ensure that we can validate the customer need, the business model, the feasibility. We are not talking large investments, but if we have the framework that I just described, which is allowing us to prioritize and compare all the ideas, then it's easy to implement this concept of seed funding where teams get some funding to go improve. And as managers on the other side who are evaluating those ideas, you're getting some confidence that by the time someone is asking you to write a big check, that idea has been proven and you're investing in something that you have reduced the risk significantly. What those limits are is something you need to decide on your own. It has to be in the context of your organization and your budget. But these are some of the limits that we have put in place at Pearson across our whole product portfolio to test whether we can move towards incremental funding like this. To talk about innovation and not talk about innovation governance would mean that we are not taking innovation really seriously. To make decisions inside large organizations sometimes takes months because people take forever to make a decision. No one really wants to be accountable for a decision as well. So they hide behind big committees where you have 15, 20 people in a room discussing and never making a decision. Or you have such a corporate structure where you have to go through 10 committees until you get to a yes or no. And so if we are talking about speed of disruption and how speed is the only competitive advantage, agility also means, can we make a decision quickly? And can we make the decision based on governance and not based on how important I am in the organization and how senior I am? And so this concept of we are going to evaluate the ideas, and not only are we teaching teams, as Elliot was talking about, how to use all these principles of experimentation to prove quickly whether something works or not, we are also going to teach our decision makers how to make decisions differently, how to actually use data to get to a decision, and how that criteria is different, as I said, depending on where in the life cycle you are. And so this is a really, really important cornerstone of any innovation ecosystem. Those decision-making committees in the organizations really need to be embedded deep into organization. We really need to empower teams to make those decisions. They need to be small, and they need to also be cross-functional. So when we talk about cross-functional, it doesn't only apply to product teams or innovation teams, it also applies to our decision makers. So can we have committees of only 3, 4 people who have all the skills to make the decisions, are empowered, have a budget, and can move the company quickly? This also means that we are completely decentralizing the decision-making from, our CEO is going to make every single decision in the organization to, we are really going to ask our leaders to think about what is the strategy, corporate business innovation strategy, and we're going to decentralize decision-making on an idea level to the teams who are actually building those ideas. And so when we talk about measuring innovation, it's really important we agree as a company, how are we going to measure success of our investment? What is our innovation strategy? What is articulation of that strategy when we talk about KPIs? How are we going to measure whether we should reallocate funds from one idea to another? And so these are some examples that successful companies use when they're measuring their innovation efforts. All of this would be it's really hard to implement, but without the culture change, it's worthless. So, there is that saying, and Eloise, who is coming after me, is going to talk more about innovation culture. Culture is strategy for breakfast, and it's really, really important for us to remember that every single day. Without changing the culture of our organization, without really embracing those principles of experimentation, continuous learning, it's impossible to be an innovative company, no matter what processes you have. Even if you have the best idea and the most competitive advantage you can have, you also need to have an organization that's believing in this. So when we talk about the values of the organization, when we talk about how we incentivize our people, when we talk about how we work with each other, what beliefs we embrace, this is what culture is all about. There is this great saying from General Electric, and they've been on this transformation journey for 6, 7 years now. It's all about DNA change. It's not about changing few processes here and there. It's not about training some people. It's really about behavioral change, accepting that we're going to work in a different way. It's about abandoning some sacred cows. So how many of you have heard, this is never going to work here? Right? And I hear that every single day as a consultant now, and not just at the company level. Inside the department, inside the large organization, you have convinced 3 business units, and there is 4 business unit that thinks they're so special, they're snowflake, it's never going to work there. There's always, few middle managers who think that, no, it's not going to work. Convince me that it's going to work here. The fact that it's working in other organization doesn't mean anything. We are different. Well, we are not really different because ultimately we are all humans and we are really hard on change ourselves. And so we need to start exhibiting all the behaviors that we have been talking about in order to change our organizations as well. So I'm going to share a few case studies, some that have been successful, and I'll start with a few that haven't been as successful as I would like them to be. This is one of the big global banks that decided to invest in innovation and set up innovation lab. FinTech is blooming around the world. They feel under threat, but they've set up a lab without thinking about why. So what is our innovation strategy? Why do we need to innovate? What results do we expect from this team? So unfortunately, although the team has done some amazing things on a really small scale, they were not set up for success, right? There was no strategy to show them direction of travel. They worked in a different way, so they created this ecosystem of collaborating with startups, developing MVPs very quickly, improving them in the market, really focusing on customers. But unfortunately, the problems they were solving for the bank were not the important problems. They were not the problems that are really going to change anything. So they would go and speak to managers in various business units, and they would get business challenges that they really didn't want to work on. So one of the pilots they did was PayPal integration. Do you think that's very innovative? Do you think that's going to change how this bank operates, or it's going to transform anything? Of course not. And so unfortunately, after 2 years, although they've changed a culture on a really smaller scale and showed the rest of the bank how the bank can operate, they were not successful, and they're just about to be closed. So just one of the examples of why it's so important to start with strategy, to think about where do we want to invest, what type of results do we expect from our teams, and really set them up for success. We also need to believe that change is necessary, and we need to be okay with this innovation team succeeding. And I'm not sure that everyone in the organization is always okay with that. I have a feeling sometimes talking to managers that, they talk about innovation, but they're secretly hoping the team is not really going to come up with anything that's going to disrupt their business. So it's okay for someone else in the business to be disrupted, but not really my business. I've been MD of this business forever. I'm bringing all this revenue. All of this is kind of almost like a personal threat, right? It's all these kids coming and telling me I don't know how to run my business anymore. This is another example of really large global organization that's been doing tremendous work in terms of changing the culture, coaching people how to act differently, working very closely with Lean Startup Company and other people around the world, building an academy. But unfortunately, although they had some limited success with some of their projects and products they're building, because, again, there was no connection to business strategy, there was no connection at the leadership level that this is going to change the future of the company, I think the leadership saw it more as culture building, capability building. It's good to educate our people on how to behave differently, but we haven't connected the dots. We haven't connected the dots that what this team is trying to do is really going to change or transform our organization. And again, although, as I said, they're doing really well in terms of trying to change the culture, because it's not connected to the strategy, I'm a bit skeptical as to how far they can go. This is one of the biggest stories in the last 5 or 6 years of company implementing lean startup really at scale. They worked with Eric when they started, and I think although it started again as a cultural change, as a bottom-up effort, I think they very quickly realized that in order to change the organization that's been around for hundreds of years, they're really going to have to tackle the rest of the innovation ecosystem as well. So how do we make decisions? So they set up growth boards that are really evaluating decisions based on data. They're working to change the resources and funding allocations. They're really thinking about what their strategy is. And they're really building that growth mindset of, we are not innovating for innovation's sake. We are innovating because we need to grow. We need to change if we want to stay in the game. I have worked at Pearson driving this effort inside the organization for almost 5 years. And it wasn't easy when we started. If you don't know, Pearson is the largest education company in the world, 40,000 employees, exists in 80 markets, grew by acquisition, which came with their set of challenges of trying to integrate all these different ways of working, culture, HR contracts, finance systems into a coherent organization and strategy and portfolio of products. And so what we have done there, and when I started, this is now a polished version. It's looking back, and telling you what we have done and how successful we were. But when we started, all we really had is, some individual experience working in large organizations. And we had Eric's first book, Lean Startup, but the book had no examples, nothing about how to do this inside large organizations. So our story was a story of a lot of assumptions, a lot of failure, a lot of pivots. The number of times I had to stand in front of our executive team and say, that plan that I presented 6 months ago, we pivoted a lot, but this is what we learned. And by adopting that approach of continuous learning, experimentation at the strategy and transformation level, we managed to actually achieve a lot. And this is still, to this day, one of the rare examples of large organizations being able to implement this innovation ecosystem at scale. And that included, really thinking about the strategy and what is the portfolio approach, focusing on our learners and customers and driving everything from that perspective, designing and implementing the lean product lifecycle and all the governance behind so our teams can move at speed, really focusing on data and evidence and teaching people how to evaluate data. When we started, one of the executives told me, well, we have all this data in the organization, we don't need more. Potentially, but they had all the wrong data. Being a publishing company, they had data about how much shelf space books were taking. They didn't have data about how customers are interacting with our products. What do teachers and students need in the classroom in the 21st century? So we made a lot of assumptions early on the journey and had to prove and disprove a lot of them. And I think one of the big reasons we were successful is because we created a movement inside the organization. We believe that the only way to be successful is to have leadership on board and get them to drive the change. But we also knew that we cannot be successful unless we create a movement. So that bottom-up approach that Elliot was talking about. And think about that community, learning from each other. Why this event is so important as well is because we are all in the same boat. Whether you are working in Serbia or in England and US, we are all struggling in the same way. Transforming these large organizations is a really hard work. This is what the journey looked like. Just one slide to show you. I have much more to share if anyone is interested and wants to get in touch after. But it really took years, and I left in 2 years ago, and they're still doing and scaling some of the efforts. What was really important is to start small. To start small, start inside one business unit, prove how it works, get leadership to buy in, and then even approaching the whole organization, still incrementally change. So proving first with few product teams, then with few business units, not working to first prove how can we do product development or innovation and idea level differently. We knew from start that if we don't tackle and prove how we can make decisions differently, how can we make strategic decisions differently, so revamping the strategic planning process, how can we collect data differently. So if you think about the components of ecosystem, it's not proving one component and then going to another. It's proving all components at a really small scale, learning from that, and then iterating on that until you have enough evidence that you can start to scale that across the organization. So again, that whole concept of learning fast, experimenting, collecting data, and closing the loop is equally important when we are running transformation efforts as it is when we are trying to implement or get new product to market. And so some of the key achievements, starting with first pilots, launching the first version, iterating on that, constantly building body of evidence so we can convince the organization on whether this is working or not. So we've done a lot with finance to help build this incremental funding model. We launched governance accelerators, proving how governance can work differently in the organization. We launched the coaching program because we knew we needed support in terms of spreading the best practice and culture across the organization. So when you think about global adoption of some of it, or active portfolio management, and even the tooling, it came years after we started, because that was later on when we were scaling the effort and we needed support. But initially it was one experiment after another. How can we do this at scale inside large organizations? And these are some of the examples of innovation award we won, but also our focus was a lot on, as I said, building that community, coaching people, and especially working with leadership on convincing them and showing them how we can work and behave differently with each other. This is one of my favorite examples, and it's a big established company that's been around for only 25 years. Can you believe that? 25 years only. And it's 600,000 employees. $1 trillion of value at the moment. And Jeff Bezos, who is founder and CEO still of Amazon, has this amazing letter that he publishes to shareholders and employees once a year. And one of the most recent ones was called "It's Always Day One at Amazon." And what he wanted to say by saying it's always day one is we need to continue to operate as a startup. We cannot lose the guard. We cannot go into establishing processes of large organizations, although we are a multi-large organization now. We need to continue to experiment. We need to continue to be customer-centric in everything we do, and they really are. We need to focus on results and outcomes, not process. So no heavy bureaucracy, no heavy processes. How can we get to outcome fast? Eric Ries has this really good saying that I love. Doesn't matter if it's on time and on budget, if it's not delivering a value to a customer or to you as an organization. And so that mentality is something that Amazon lives and breathes by. Embracing change and experimentation at every single level in the organization. I'll show you one example. That doesn't mean that everything they do is successful. They had a big failure a couple of years ago with a phone in which they invested $500 million or something. So they failed too. Sometimes those experiments don't work. But they try to really embrace that philosophy of experimentation every single level. And the high velocity decision making. Jeff is known to decentralize decision making. He's not in a room when every single decision is made. And often he says that he disagrees with decisions that his management teams are making, but he still supports. He has this philosophy. Once we leave the meeting, whatever happened, however you objected against that idea in a meeting, once we leave the meeting, we are all behind it. And we are all going to go and try and make it a success. So, they're really removing that personality from it. And this is an example of one of their latest. Again, they're also now a portfolio company and looking for new business models all the time. It's Amazon Go. I don't know if you heard of it. It's store they're launching in a few cities in US at the moment, testing the pilot, where there is no cash register. There is no paying. Every single item has a code, and once you put it in your bag, it's scanned, and you leave the store without paying for it. And so they launched a beta first on a really small scale. The technology wasn't up to scratch at all, so they couldn't have more than 20 people in a room. It was a really tiny room when they were testing the concept. Then they launched the first store in Seattle, and they've been working on iterating on that and have a few more stores in Seattle and San Francisco now. And they now plan, based on all the data they are collecting and all the evidence, to launch 3,000 locations by 2021. But this is an example of company that has the money, has the resources, and could have said, this is a great idea, we're going to test it just a little bit, and then we're going to go at scale. And instead they said, let's go and really understand what our customers need. Can we solve that need? Are they willing to pay for this experience? Can we make a business out of it? So some of the key takeaways. It's really important to think big when it comes to strategy, really think about where you want to go. But there is no such thing as a big idea. Every idea is a good idea, no matter how small, and I would actually encourage you to test as many small ideas as you can possibly can, because a lot of those small ideas may merge into a big idea that's a successful business one day. And start to embrace that mentality inside your organizations with everything you do. You are never too big to be nimble and to be agile, and as I said, agility means everything from how we act and how we make decisions to how we bring and how quickly can we bring products to market and how we are organized ultimately as well. This idea of adaptability, of being comfortable with not knowing where we are going all the time is really, really important when we think about strategy as well, because we need to test our strategies. We are not convinced. No one here in this room has a crystal ball and can predict what the future is going to bring in the next 5 years. And so having that mentality when it comes to strategy of we are going to set direction, but we are going to be okay if that direction changes, because it will, I can guarantee you that. That's something that really needs to be built as a muscle inside the organization. Taking that first loop, whether it's strategy or building a product or testing the idea, that first loop is always the hardest. But if we don't close the loop, we don't have the evidence of, is our strategy working or not? And we have to learn how to close the loop. We need to learn how to measure success of our strategy. We need to learn how to prioritize ideas in order to test our strategy, and how to collect the data, and what is the good data to collect. So measure everything. KPIs are really important, but we are not talking about vanity metrics. We are really talking, so don't measure number of experiments. It's irrelevant number, but measure impact your ideas is having on customers, measure impact of your strategic hypothesis, measure whether you need to reallocate resources from one part of the portfolio to another, or from one idea to another. Large organizations really struggle to kill ideas. People get so emotionally entangled in keeping the project or idea alive that they forget that, it's okay to pull a plug. The more we learn how to pull a plug and reinvest our resources, which are not infinite, into something that can actually work, the better for all of us. We talked a lot about culture. I mentioned it's a movement, so really investing in building that culture in the organization, taking everyone on that journey with us. I think a lot of what we are seeing happening inside large organizations where people with some skills feel outdated. I've been a publishing editor, and digital has happened, so I'm going to be outside of the market, of the job place. I will not be able to get a different job. It's really hard to convince people to change if they constantly feel they're going to be unemployed. And they have amazing experience that they can bring to the organization in a very different way if we can embrace the principles of adaptability, continuous learning, and experimentation. And so really work hard on bringing everyone on the journey and building a culture in which everyone can flourish. I wanted to almost close with this because, Steve was such a phenomenal leader. And I think this statement really resonates with me because I've seen so many organizations where they go and they hire a lot of smart people, they hire external consultants, and then they ignore them completely. They ignore every single advice they can get from those people. They don't empower them to make decisions, to really bring ideas forward. And so why hire smart people if you're not going to let them get on with their job? I love to hire people who are smarter than me because I think I can always learn something else. And I think every single leader needs to embrace that in the way they work. And to finish with, don't forget it's a journey, and it's not a linear journey. I don't think there is a single person in this room that's gonna tell me that their personal journey was linear and that they knew at 18 or when they left high school and went to university where they're gonna end up in 10, 20 years. And we have all learned a lot, and take that learning and that personal experience to wherever you work and embrace all those principles we talked about it, because it's really, really important. So I'm going to finish here and open for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonja. It was very inspirational.
Thank you.
We will move to questions. We have time only for 3. I believe Jelena will read out the first question.
Yes, the question is from the anonymous.
Question from the anonymous. What are the leadership skills needed to facilitate and sustain a lean transformation?
I think adaptability is one of the key. I think ability to say, I don't have all the answers, and I'm willing to learn. I think I'm very grateful for where I came from, because I learned how to learn here, and I think that made a huge difference in my life. And I'm not sure that all schools really teach you how to learn. And as a leader, telling to your troops, I have an idea where we're going, but I don't have all the answers, and we're going to work together to figure this out. I think it's one of the really important characteristics. So being nimble, being agile, being adaptable, showing by example, don't expecting someone else to change, but you are so perfect that you don't need to continually invest in yourself, are some of the key skills I think we need.
Thank you. Second question is from Biljana. The innovation is, quote, reserved, unquote, for already highly profitable companies. They have enough money to invest. What about the struggling ones? Any tips?
Well, I think it's even more important to innovate if you are a struggling company, because you have that running platform already, right? Some of the organizations I work, especially in the finance sector, although they're scared of fintech, they're really not under threat yet. They're still making so much money that that's why I think they're toying a little bit with innovation, but not taking it seriously. When I took my role at Pearson, we were a struggling company already. Our share price was going down. The organization was going through tremendous change all the time. We had 3 or 4 reorganizations in 5 years I was there. And so it's even more important to think about the strategy, to think about where you're going to invest, and to invest in seeding those seeds that can bloom into new businesses that can take over your existing business.
Thank you. And Luca asks, how do you go from one innovative department to innovative company?
I think one department is a first seed, and I call that, early stages of transformation, when there are enthusiasts in the organizations, like I was, who have read the book, who have been to a conference, and who wanted to, make a world a better place, organization a better place. In order to scale that, you need to convince leadership. Doesn't mean you convince them to do everything at scale immediately. You convince them to give you a chance to prove how this can work. And then you recruit, and by recruit, I really mean you go and recruit a lot of middle management, and you work with them, and you take them on that journey. And you never tell them that they're wrong. You just show them by example how things can be very, very different. And so use any technique you can, bring experts from outside to help and convince them and give them examples, work on smaller scale to prove how something can work until you can scale from one department to another. But building that innovation ecosystem, as I said, is a key, because without it, the teams cannot be successful. They run into what I call the walls of the enterprise, where everyone is saying no all the time and nothing is set up for you to succeed.
Thank you.
Sonja, you all left us even more inspired than we hoped for. Thank you very much for your speech.
Thank you.
Big applause for Sonja.